Hi and welcome to this video walkthrough using the Wordpress REST API and React. What we're going to do today is set up an SPA, a single page application using React on the front end and WordPress on the back end. Why would you want to do that, you might ask? Well, WordPress is a really great backend. It's stable, it's mature, it's secure, it's got a ton of features like different user roles and permissions. SPAs built with libraries like React are super fast, they're great for UX, and they offer you way more control over the front end than you get with a pure WordPress installation. So how's it going to work? Well, we're going to create a really simple single page application here in React. Here's one that I made earlier. Basically, it allows the user to sign up, to log in, and then to view some profile information right here on the profile page. So what's happening in the background is that when you sign up a user, it's actually going to create a new WordPress user. And then when you go to the profile page, it will actually bring down their profile information from WordPress. So as you can see, I'm currently running this one locally. But in order to keep this as real world as possible, I'm going to build this onto a live WordPress site. I'm using some pretty cheap standard shared hosting. And to help us make the most of the WordPress REST API, which is what actually allows us to interact with WordPress, I'm going to use a great free plugin, which I'll say a little bit more about later. But rest assured, it is a free plugin. You don't have to pay extra for different features. And it's absolutely great. So we're mostly going to be working with functional components in React, but there will be a bit of PHP later. It's kind of optional, but it is pretty useful. And as you'll see, probably if you're working with a WordPress backend, you're going to be having to write some custom scripts or WordPress hooks or something at some point in PHP. So it's not a bad thing at all. As this is just a demo site, I'm not going overboard on the design. This is just about showing how React and WordPress can work together. I've added a bit of CSS just to start the SPA, but as you can see, it's not exactly stylish. Right, let's get started with the React. Okay, so this is just a little diagram of the React app. It's just going to use 7 functional components. We've got the app component, which will anchor the entire app. That's going to render a header, a profile page, a sign up form, a login form, and then the last two, the sign up form and the login form, will both render their own components, which will actually speak to the WordPress API. We're going to save some state, mostly in the app component, just to pass down so that different components can access things like the username. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Right, I'm going to open up VS Code and I'm just going to use create React app to get the ball rolling. Okay, let's just have a look at the basic components of this app. In a moment, we're going to look in much more detail at how we're going to code up the components that actually deal with the API call. But these basic ones, there's quite a lot of regular React in here. So I've got it pre-prepared and I'm just going to talk you through it. So here in the main app component, then we have imported hash router, or router, as we say in England. And we're using that on this navigation element here. So we've got links to the / page, which will be our profile page, to sign up and to log in. And then down here inside each switch, we've got those pages, the exact path, of course, to the / so it doesn't get confused with any of the other paths. And then in each case, we're just rendering that component, the profile page, the login page, the sign up page. And as you can see, we're passing plenty of props down. If we have a look at the header, we're passing in the username, the is logged in, which is going to be a Boolean from this state. Here's the username, here's the is logged in Boolean, and the server message. So the server message is just going to be a place where we can store anything that comes back from the server, such as a JWT that's invalid or a password that's incorrect or something like that. So we'll pass that all over to header. And then the header component is pretty simple. It takes in both children and the rest of the props. Why does it take in children? Because here, as children, we've got this nav element. So that is the children. So it renders the children right here. It says welcome display name. So display name, we've got this ternary here. If props is logged in, is true, then we will take the props.username and use that as display name. So it's going to say welcome Bob. If not, welcome guest. And that's basically all there is to the header component. Let's move on to the sign up components. So this one is a little bit more complicated. We've got two bits of state in here. The sign up form itself is down here. We've got the state because forms in React, well, we normally use controlled forms, and we certainly are here. So we've got the form down here, username, email address, and password. In each case, we've given them name, user, email, pass, and a value. So this value comes straight from that state signupdetails.user, because inside the state here, we have actually an object. So the sign up details, here's the object with user, email, password, initialized to empty strings. So as the form is completed, this onChange will trigger this handle change function, and the handle change function takes in the event. It destructures name and value from the event target, and then it uses the set sign up details function to take in the previous state and return that state plus any changes using the name and the value. So as you type, that gets filled out. It doesn't do anything in terms of API calls there. It's just completing that state. When the user has filled in all of the details they need to and they hit submit, this handle submit function just uses the spread operator here to make a direct copy. To make a direct copy of this state and put it in this state. There's a good reason for doing that, which we'll come to later. But basically, when we go to make the API call, obviously we don't want to make the API call until all of that data is complete. When that data is complete, we copy it into that state, and that is the state which is later going to trigger the API call via a use effect and another component. So if we just have a look down at the bottom, we're just rendering that form, and we've also are going to render this component sign up API. We haven't created that component yet. We're going to create it together in a minute, and that's the one that's going to make the API call. So all will be revealed there. The login component is very, very similar. Again, we've got two states. We've got one which comes straight from the form, and then another one which will be a copy of that one when the user presses submit. So it's basically the same, very similar handle change functions, very similar handle submit function, very similar form. This form is a little bit smaller because you don't need your email to log in, just your username and password. Now, with those components being so similar, you might be asking yourself, could the code be more dry? Could we combine and reduce? The answer to that is almost definitely yes. I've just kept it separate just to keep this a sort of really simple application. But yeah, I'm absolutely sure there is space there to make improvements. Lastly, I've thrown in a bit of CSS just to style things up. As I said at the beginning, there's not loads going on there, but I'm including it in the code, so I'm linking in the description to all the code. So for what it's worth, it's there. It just makes it look a tiny little bit nicer. But yeah, certainly nothing special. Okay, before we start making the API calls, I think it would be a good idea to have a good look at the plugin we're going to use. Okay, the Simple JWT Login Plugin. is what we're using. It's a really great plugin. It's completely free. Does loads of stuff. It's pretty straightforward to use. There's not loads of sort of instructions and pointers, so you do have to find your way around it a little bit, but it does get everything done, I think, pretty neatly indeed. Let's have a quick look. So what we're going to start off by doing is registering a new user. So if we just pop down here to register user, the first thing we see up here is an example URL. So that has actually got the endpoint that we need to call when we actually send our sign up data to WordPress. We have an option here to either require an auth code or not. If we say no, we get this warning. Say it's not recommended to allow register without auth code. So we're going to keep that as a yes. That does mean that we're going to need to create this server-side PHP script of our own. The reason being that if you're including an auth code, but then you're putting that auth code on the front end, well, it's a complete waste of time because it's accessible to anybody. So we'll have to add that server side. What else can we do here? Well, we can decide what kind of profile we want the people we sign up to be. I've put it to contributor. You could put it to subscriber or whatever you want. Obviously, letting randoms sign up as administrator is pretty daft, but as long as you know what you're doing, that's absolutely fine. The rest of this stuff I'm going to leave fairly well alone. I'm just going to use this a bit later. User login. We don't want people to have to log into this app with just their password. So once they've signed up and used, with just their email, once they've signed up with their email, after that, they can log in with their username. So we will add that one in. So that's the first endpoint that we get to use to register. Now, you'll see when we create the component that actually speaks to WordPress that there's going to be a little bit of back and forth here. So once we've got that user registered, there are other things to do, such as log that user in. Now, logging in happens automatically. That is to say, to log somebody in, you use the JSON web token that you get back from an authenticated login. So down here in authentication, we have got another endpoint here. So having registered the user, we're going to send the email and their password, or in fact the username and their password, to this endpoint, and that is what's going to send us the JWT, and it's the JWT that we're going to use to do the login. So quite a convoluted process, but you'll see how it works if you haven't come across it before. Really important thing to look at in here is the auth codes. In the name of high security, I've called my auth key, and my actual, the auth key code, auth key, and my actual auth key ABC123. This is just a demonstration app. It's not going to be on the internet for long, so you'll be wanting to make it all much more secure, I'm sure. But that's just important to remember. We do use those later. This is the information we're going to add in the server-side script. So whatever we use in that script has to correspond to what we've got in here. I'll say a little bit more about that when we write the script. And that's basically everything we need to know for now about this app. It does look a bit confusing with all of the going back and forth to different endpoints, but it does make a lot of sense when you get used to it. And you're going to see it in action in just a second. So with that said and done, what we need to do now is go over to the sign up API component and start getting that coded. Okay, so here's a little list of the things that we need this component to do. So we need to start off by taking the username and email and password and getting that over to the server-side script. The server-side script is going to add an authentication key. So that's a key that we set in the plugin. It's going to send that completed request to the WordPress endpoint. That's the first of the WordPress endpoints we're going to use. WordPress will send back a success or fail. The server-side script is then going to try to authenticate, assuming it's a success, by sending the username and password to another endpoint. And that second endpoint is going to, if it's successful, return a JWT. What we can then do is get that JWT into local storage, and then we can actually divert the user to the home page or the actual profile page. So that's everything that we need this component to do. Let's go ahead and do it. Right, to get this app started off then, we're going to import React, and we are going to need not just React, but we're going to need use state and use effect. Use effect is basically always used when making some API calls in React. Now that's set up the function. So this function is going to be called sign up API. And before we forget, let's just do an export default on that. Export default sign up API. Great. Well, it's definitely going to take in props. We know that already because we've already, in the sign up component, we're already passing down 4, maybe 5 props. So definitely need props. What's going to happen then inside this function? Well, we need some state, and the state that we're actually going to save here is this final URL. That's the only state we're going to save in this component, but we do need that to be in state. So I'm going to call this URL to sign in. A capital S there, URL to sign in, and set URL to sign in. And that's going to equal use state, not use effect, use state. And we'll initialize that just with an empty string there. So we've got URL to sign in, set URL to sign in. That's great. Okay, so now we need to make our first fetch call. And this is going to be the one which actually goes to the server-side script. So we're not yet communicating with WordPress. Right, so we're going to make a fetch call. We need use effect, and use effect takes a callback function, and inside that function, we need to just think, actually, before we do anything else, when do we want this to run? Oh, I've just not done the arrow function properly there, have I? Takes the arrow function in there, perfect. And yeah, so we've got the dependency array here. So as you're probably aware, use effect runs when it first renders and when anything in the dependency array re-renders. So we only really want this use effect to run when this form here has been submitted. And we know that when the form is submitted, the handle submit sets the API details, which we've got in state up here. It's this one, API details. So actually we're passing that down through props. Let's just make sure that when we do props.API details sign up, then that is when this use effect runs. Other thing to think about, we don't really want this use effect to run before that. It's just a waste of time. It's going to be trying to do things that we're not ready for because the user hasn't actually entered any details. So in order to do that, we can just start off with an if clause, and we're going to actually take the same dependency array. So we're going to say if props.API details sign up, let's say .user .length is greater than 0. So only if there is some data in this one here, user. So if that's been sent, we should have a username, an email, and a password. So when we're ready with that, that means we're ready to go. If it's if it's not greater than 0, then this use effect is going to stop right there. Okay, the other thing to think about is where this where this fetch call is going to go. So I'm going to start off with const URL equals, and then I'm just going to bring in the place where we're going to have our server-side script. So basically wherever you're putting your script, mine is in a subfolder called student, and I've just called it reg.php. Obviously you can call it whatever you need to call it. We can give that a const because it's not going to change. Now we're going to fetch, and we're going to fetch that URL, and inside that fetch we are going to have a method which is post. We want that in capitals. And we are going to have a body which is holding the data. And here we run into our first problem. When you want to send a post request to PHP, sorry, that's meant to be capitals. Sorry, when you're making a fetch request to PHP, you can't just shove stuff in the body. We actually really need to make some form data. So I'm just going to call this form data. I'm going to start it with a lowercase f. And before this is going to work, then we need to just come up here and set up what our form data is. So that form data equals new form data. So you'll notice here we've got the capital F. So we're actually creating form data here. We've just called it, we could call this something else. We could call it login data, sign-in data. It might even make more sense. I'm going to leave it as form data for now. That is a method, so we need the brackets on that. Now, form data dot append, and this is where we add the stuff that we want to send. And in fact, we're going to basically add three things: the username, the password, and the email address. So everything we need, we've got here: user, email, pass, and we want exactly that, all from API details sign up. So this first one is going to be user, comma, and then we can just say, oh, just cutting and pasting the wrong thing, props dot, so it's API details sign up, dot user. So that is going to append a user, and the value is going to be whatever has been filled in that form. If we just copy that 3 times, so in here I can put email and dot email, and here we can go with pass and dot pass. That should be everything we need. Right, what we want to do then when we get some data back from this fetch call? Well, it's going to send us back some kind of response. So we're going to chain a then to it, and it's going to send us some data, and sorry, it's going to give us a response, beg your pardon. And that response, we are just going to turn it into usable JSON. It's actually going to send us a string, I believe. And then we're going to chain another then, and here we're going to just take whatever that JSON data is, and we are going to, we're going to here need to find out whether that request has been successful or not, basically. So how are we going to handle this data? Basically, what we want to see is if the data is a success or not. So we're going to just sort of say if data, and then we're going to look for in that object for success, and if that is equal to true, so basically if everything is good, what we want to do then is save that JSON web token that it sent us. So we're going to stick that in local storage, so that's obviously how we're going to persist this user. So we're going to call it JWT, and we're going to set it to be data. So this data object that we've got here. Now, confusingly, within the data object, there is a data array as well, and that contains the JWT. So yeah, it looks a little bit strange to call it data. It's just that this is giving us, we've called this data, and then actually the object that's coming down itself contains some data, which contains the JWT. Right, with that done, then we need to set this URL to sign in. And that URL to sign in is going to be one of the endpoints that we get from the plugin. So again, we've got the web address there, we've got the endpoint, and then it's appending this JWT, so it's exactly what we've just put into local storage. And for good measure, we might just console log it. We might need that later. We'll just console log the data. So where does that URL come from? Where does that root come from? Let's just pop back to the plugin, and that login comes from here. So it's this one basically. We've got the auto login and then the JWT on the end. Okay, so that should be all well and good. We do need to think a little bit about the idea that it might not work. So we can just put an else statement on the end of our if. So else, so that is to say, if success is not true, then what should we do? Well, for a start, we should probably still console log the data, but also we've got this state coming in, sorry, these props coming in, which is this set server message. So this server message will just display to the user what the problem was. So we're going to say props.set server message. And we can just set that to be, again, in data and data, whatever the message is. Oh, and my battery is running low. Let's just quickly. So yeah, within that data object, then props.set server message is going to be data, and then in there is a message which we can then just display on the screen. Okay, so all good so far. We've got a little bit more to do with this component because we still need to think about this URL to sign in, where it's actually going to go. So what have we done so far? We've created the server-side script. No, we haven't, but we will do in a second. We've got this completed request to center to endpoint 1. That's done. WordPress has sent back success fail. Server-side script will then try to authenticate by sending username and password to another endpoint. We're assuming it's done that. We're going to get back the success, which we've handled already. And then it returns this JWT that we've put in local storage. So we need to deal with the last part. Now, the last part, we're going to need another use effect because we're going to make another fetch call. So in this use effect down here, what are we going to do? Well, we are going to firstly, well, let's just put our arrow function in there and then think about the dependency array. So yeah, this use effect, again, it only wants to run under specific circumstances, and those circumstances are that this lot was okay. How do we know if this was okay? Well, it's going to give us the URL that we need to log in. So if we pop up here, we've got URL to sign in. When that gets updated, that is when we want this use effect to run. So, oh, I didn't put it in the array. And again, we only want this use effect to run when that updates. So we're going to put another if in there, So it's going to be if URL to sign in dot length is greater than 0. And if it's not, do nothing, because that means that there is no URL, and so there's no point in running this. Okay, now we need to do a fetch. So we're going to fetch, and what are we going to fetch? Well, we're going to fetch, for a start, the URL to sign in. That's the URL that we've been wanting to get our hands on. And then to complete this fetch, then we're just going to give it a method, and in this case the method is actually get. No form data to apply here. We're just actually building up that URL to sign in. That's all we need to do. Because which is obviously what we've already done here. We've got the URL. All we had to do is put the JWT on the end. So, and that's going as a GET request. It's going over HTTPS, so it's perfectly secure. Right, when we've got that GET request sorted, obviously we're going to get something back, so we need to handle that. So we're going to get a response, and we're just going to check that the response we're just basically going to start off by checking if the response dot status is 200. So if we get the 200 okay, then that means we're good to go. So if that is the case, then we need to do a couple of things. We need to let the entire app know that the user is now logged in. So again, coming down from props, we have got set username and set is user logged in. So that's just a Boolean, and that's the actual username. So we can do in here props.set is logged in. So that can now become true. And props.set username, that is going to be whatever the username is. And how do we know the username? Well, we've got the username already. Props.API details signup.user. Okay. Like that. And then the last thing we want to do is to change the page. So we're now going to actually take the user from that sign up page. So that sign up page is done. So and we can just do that basic sort of JavaScript window location replace. So we're going to take them to the profile page, which is working like a home page effectively. I think if I doubled up some inverted commas there. Perfect. Again, we just need to think about the fact that this might fail. So for now, I'm just going to console.log. There was an error. Right. That page is pretty much done. So if we can sort that out with the PHP script, we'll be we'll be well on our way to making the app work. Okay, so now we're in PHP, so we are going to need some PHP tags to open and close PHP. Now, the first thing that we need to think about here, well, in fact, that's just let's sort of pseudocode out everything we're going to need. So we're going to bring in our post request. So we're going to sort of accept the data from React, let's say. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add the Auth Key. We're then going to send a post to WordPress, and hopefully we're going to receive a success message. We're then going to send, so this is the post, sign up request, send sign up request post, and then we're going to send the authentication request to WordPress and send the result to React. And obviously in both cases we'll be handling errors as and when they occur. So let's get started with that. So how are we going to accept the data from React? Well, in the sign up API JS component, we created this form data and we posted it off to this script, and we've used user, email, and pass. So all we need to do now is receive them in here. So we're going to set up some variables. So for email, for password, so user login was what WordPress called it. If we now just assign these to the post that is incoming, and it being PHP, we'd better remember to put our semicolons on the end, else we're going to get an error. So email, we just called email. Oh, I've still got multiple lines. So email, we called email. Password, we called pass. And user login, we just called a user, I think. Did we? Yes, we did. So that was just that one there. User, email, and pass. We've got them in a different order. Makes no difference at all. So we've accepted those requests. So they will now be available as those variables. That's great. The next thing we have to do is to add the auth key. So we just need to set up a variable here, and we can call this one whatever we want, but I'm going to call it auth key, and I am going to set it to, if we just pop back to the app, so in the authentication codes, I beg your pardon, here we are. So we can call this what we want, and you should go for something, as it tells you here, go for something long and convoluted and secure. I've just called it auth key just for the sake of this demonstration. Here, likewise, this is your actual key code down here. You want it to be something long and obscure and secure. I've called it ABC123. So if we pop back to our PHP script, so our auth key is ABC123, and actually I've called this auth key. I could call that anything as long as we call it auth key in the URL as the parameter of the URL. It actually doesn't matter. So the next thing we need to do is actually build up that URL. So let's create a URL variable, and in that we're going to need the URL that they give us back in the register user. So if we just copy that, and we can paste that right here. And of course we need to make sure we've got our parameters in there. So everything up until this point is absolutely fine. So we're going to close that off there. And then in PHP, obviously we are going to use the dot or the periods to join things together to concatenate. So what we need here is our email. So we're basically saying email equals email. We can get rid of that. And then password equals, you guessed it, password. So I'm just taking what we've got up here. And we're going to need the auth key. I'm just going to add in the middle actually, because it's not mandatory. You can sign people up with email and password on their own. I think it's much better to add the username here. So the user login is what we're going to use. So we just need here and user login equals user login, and then and password equals password, and auth key. Oh, it's getting a bit long here. And auth key equals auth key. How does that look if we put the semicolon on the end? Oh, we've forgotten the dot there. Let's just double check that. So need the semicolon. We're getting this error just for that semicolon there, I think. Okay, so as I say, we could call that anything we want. That's just the name of the variable, but that auth key there, that has to be the same as whatever we put in auth codes. So if I change that to Bob123 or whatever, then I need to change that to Bob123. This is just a variable name, call it what you want. Likewise, obviously the key there, the key code has to be the same as that one. And that's it. So we have got email equals email, user login equals user login, password equals password, and auth key equals auth key. That looks absolutely fine. Right, now we need to send the sign up request, post to WordPress, and hopefully receive a success message. Right, I'm just going to cut and paste a few lines of PHP in here, and then I'm just going to sort of talk about what that actually does. So we're setting up this request right here. We've got the URL that we've just created. So it's a new curl. We're appending various options here. It's a post. We've put the URL in there. Do we want to hear back? Yes, absolutely. So what we're going to hear back is the server output, and then that obviously is just going to execute the above. Then we close down that connection. That server output is actually going to come back to us as a string, or come back to this PHP script as a string. If we do server output underscore decode as our variable here, sorry, that's just our variable name, obviously call it what you want. Sorry, it's JSON underscore decode server output. That is going to give us something we can work with, i.e. it's basically going to give us an object where we can access the data. So hopefully that is going to come back as a success, but we need to check that. So what we need next is to set up an if-else statement. So if we just put here, is set, we're just using in PHP just to check that something exists. So server output decode success. If that exists, which it will do, as long as something comes back, it will do. And if the success is equal to 0, and it's just going to give us a Boolean 0 or 1. So if it's giving us a 0, that's telling us that it's failed. Okay, so that's bad news, but okay, all we want to do then is echo that server output, and we're going to handle that back in React. If that happens, if it is a failure, then we stop there as far as the PHP is concerned. However, if not, the else statement that we're going to put in here is going to handle the authentication. So let's just grab that now. Right, so what's actually happening then in this else statement? So if this has failed, we're just echoing that back to React. Okay, it hasn't failed. It's come through good. So the success was not 0. The success came back as 1. So what we want to do now is authenticate. How are we going to do that? So first we need the authentication URL, and that I've just taken from authentication. Here it is. That's the one. And obviously we need to use the email and the password that they've just used to sign up with. Again, we put together this call, and it's going to come back and it's going to give us a server output. And all we need to do is echo that server output, because we're going to handle it all back in React, because that is actually going to end up giving us a JWT. Right, so that is actually the end of the PHP script. Now we can go back to React and see where we are. Okay, so the next thing to look at is the login API. So the sign up API is done. I've already put the code for the login API here because it's very, very similar to the sign up API. We don't need to go through it all again. Just like before, so at the bottom of the sign up component, I've just rendered, sorry, at the bottom of the login component, I've just rendered login API. And again, we're passing all of the props that we need, which is basically the same props that we passed down to the sign up API. So login API, very, very similar. We've got the URL to login state, and then we have a use effect. We create the form data. So again, that's based exactly on the form that came in from the login component, and we send off that form data, basically the username and the password. The only difference is on this one, we're not using the server-side script. You can do, however, I'm just doing it a bit differently just to sort of show both ways. So yeah, I think it is a good idea to use a server-side script, but in this case, we're not appending any auth code. We're just using this REST point that comes straight from the plugin. Here it is. So on the authentication page, so we're posting the email. Well, it says here the email and password. It does make it clear here. You've got the option email or username and password. I'm going for username and password. I think that's more convenient. So that's what we're taking, the username and password from the login form, and off it goes to that endpoint. So likewise, we've appended that to the form data, and we're posting all of that via fetch. And then we're doing exactly the same thing. If it's successful, then we're going to set the JWT into local storage. And then we are going to set the URL to log in using that JWT. If it fails, then we'll take the server message and we'll tell the client exactly what's gone wrong. And then we have a second use effect. So just like before, this one we're using get. We're sending this URL with the JWT that we've just created. And then we're going to, assuming it's successful, we're going to divert the user to the main page of the app, the profile page in this case. And that is basically all there is to the login API. Okay, it's time to deal with the profile page. So from the main app component, we have rendered the profile page on the /root. So it's basically the home page. And we have sent down plenty of props. So that component is going to know whether the user is logged in. It's going to be able to set the login. And that's important. It's not just the sign up and login pages that need to be able to set if the user's logged in. I want that page to be able to as well, because if a user comes back to the site having logged in just a few minutes before, then obviously they want to be persisted. And so that component needs to be able to check whether or not that user is still logged in, i.e. if they still have a valid JWT. So that being said, it can also then set the username. It knows the username, and it needs to be able to feed back the server message if there's a problem, such as the JWT is expired, which is very plausible. So what do we actually need to do in the profile page? It's a little bit different. I've just put a few prompts in here. So I've obviously imported React and useState and useEffect. We've exported the component, obviously. So the first thing we need to deal with on the list is to set some state. So this state is going to keep the page text and the data ultimately we get from WordPress. So this first state here, page text, I've set that to you're not currently logged in, please log in to see your profile. So that's just obviously what a user will see if they're not logged in, and we can change it if they are logged in. And then the next two, which I have just set to an empty string each, this is the email address and the registration date. That is information we're going to take down from WordPress if the user authenticates. If they don't authenticate, obviously nothing will appear because WordPress is not going to send us anything. So that's the state sorted. The next thing we want to do is set up a use effect, and that use effect is going to check local storage for a JWT. If it finds one, then it needs to authenticate it. If it doesn't find one, then the user's not logged in, and all the user can do is view this basic page text that we've put up here. So let's go ahead and do that. Firstly, we need to get the JWT out of local storage if it exists. We'll start with the use effect, and straight up, we're going to set a component variable here. Let's say let user JWT equals local storage get item JWT. However, what if it's not there? If it's not there, we're going to get an error message, and that's just going to throw a massive spanner in the works. So what we can say is either get the JWT from local storage or set that that user JWT to an empty string. While we're here, we might just console.log the user JWT. Now, the rest of this, we only want to happen if the JWT exists. So again, let's go for an if statement, and we're going to say if user JWT.length is greater than 0, i.e. there's something there, let's try and authenticate it. If there's something there and it's not usable, then the authentication will fail, no big deal. If there's nothing there, no point in trying to authenticate. Right, so what are we going to authenticate? Well, we need a URL, and we need to append the JWT to it. So I'm just going to set a variable here, let URL equals. Then we've got the REST route for validating a token. Let's just nip back here, and it should be, I think, right down here. Validate JWT URL example. So this is the route that we need. We stick the JWT on the end and send it off using fetch. So just using a sort of string literal here to append the user JWT onto the end. So now, of course, we can fetch that URL, and I mean, we could just leave it at that, actually, because it's just making a GET request. So we don't really, I think it's just going to default to that. If it doesn't, we'll come back and do something about it. So we want to make the response to some usable JSON format, and we're going to need to take the data and see what we get from that data. And so the object that we're going to get back is something now we're a little bit familiar with. So it's going to be something like if data success, and I'm just going to put here is equal to true. I think before we checked if we got a status 200. We might have to alter one of those later, or we might not. We'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So if that is true, then what do we want to do? Well, that means that the JWT we've got is active, and therefore the user is authenticated. We could quickly just console.log, just for our own benefit, user is persisted. So we've now checked that the user is, is, as I say, has got an active JWT. Now, the page text and the other things that we've got in this state, we need to do something with them. Let me just copy over a couple. of lines of code. So we've got set email. So that's just going to set the email to the data that we get back will actually contain this user information. So in this case, we're going to set the user email. The reg date is just going to be the date of registration. And then we'll change the set page text. So that's just going to have the user name's user profile as a title. That's all that one does. Now, of course, if you're using WordPress as a backend, there's all sorts of data you might want to bring down. So you'll probably end up creating your custom hooks or your custom endpoints somewhere in WordPress. And maybe that's something we'll discuss another day. I've done it. It's not particularly difficult, even if PHP is not your forte. It is doable. In this case, we're keeping it really simple, and I'm just going to display this user data as if it's a sort of personal dashboard. And the next thing that we want to do is just update the other state. And by the other state, I mean we need to let the rest of the app know that the user is now logged in. So we can do props dot set is logged in to true. So that should let the rest of the app, their header, etc. know. We also want to set the username. So we've got props dot set user props dot set username, and so the username is going to be basically most of what we've got here. It's going to be data user login. I think if it fails, we'll come back and change it. And now we should also just think about the server message. If we don't say anything with the server message here, if this is a client's second or third attempt to log in, they will still be seeing any previous error they got. So we just need to clear that error just by setting the server message to an empty string. So let's say the first time, I mean, and this is probably more important. Yeah, well, let's say they've logged in. And now they've come to the profile page. If it took them 2 attempts to log in, we don't want the profile page to displaying the server message, wrong password, because obviously now they've put in the right password. So we just want to clear out any server message that's no longer needed. Right. We should have an else here, because what if this success is actually false, or we don't get the 200? For our own benefit, again, we might just quickly console log something like persist failed. And in fact, we'll probably want to console log the data as well, just so we can work out what's going on. And then we need to take that server message and just update it. So in that server message, we can have data message, and then that will say, okay, your token was invalid or something like that. Now, again, there might well be a case for doing something a little bit more complicated there. I mean, your JWT has expired is probably not something that means a lot to a regular web user, so you might want to change that to a more friendly message. But for now, we're just going to stick with the message the plugin sends us. Right. What else do we need to do? So once we've authenticated the user, we're pretty much done with this component. I think we just need to think about when this use effect runs. We haven't put our dependency array in. Let's do that now. Do we need to put anything at all in this dependency array? Actually, no, because every time this profile page renders, we want it to check to see if the user is persisting. You might not always want to keep it that way. You might sort of think, okay, I've persisted them once. I don't need to persist them every 5 minutes if they keep refreshing. So you could rig up a different system, but for now we're just going to say the profile page renders. Let's check that they're still logged in. I mean, who knows, in the meantime they might have signed out, so yeah, you wouldn't want to sort of keep them persisting after that point. So we're just going to leave that one empty. So anytime that the profile page renders, then we will see if the user should or should not be persisted. Let's just format the code a little bit. Last thing that we do need to do here is I've just put at the bottom of the list, return whatever we need to display. So down here we need a return statement, and in there we are going to have, in fact I'm just going to cut and paste it across. You don't need to particularly watch me type it all out. Just talk you through it. So again, we have got the basic CSS stuff that we don't need to worry about too much. As I said at the beginning, it's very, very basic. Header, and then we've got the server message at the top. So if there is a problem, it will be displayed. If not, it's just going to display nothing. The page text, so that might say you're not currently logged in, please log in, or it might say this is Bob's user profile. And then underneath that, we'll display the email address and we'll display the date of registration on WordPress, which has come down from the WordPress plugin. And that is basically everything for the profile page. So the next thing to do is to stick it all online and see if it works. Okay, so let's see if this can run. First, we're just going to try running it locally. So I'm just going to do npm start in VS Code and see what we get on localhost. Okay, so we've hit an error, which is not that surprising. Login API is not defined. So basically I haven't imported something. So login API, oh, here we are. We're right here on the login page. Login API is not defined. So I guess we render it down here. Yeah, we do. So let's just grab that and stick that up here. So we're going to import login API from login API. Let's see what happens now. Okay, no errors there. And we're working, sort of. So the profile page isn't looking quite how I expected, but we are getting our message. We're getting welcome guest, sign up. Okay, sign up page is more like what I expected. Likewise, login page. So what's going on with the profile page? I think I know that when I cut and pasted something lazily, I think that one is not app header at all. It's not an app header. I think that one's just called page. That class name. Let's see what we get now. Great. That's it. Okay, so let's try signing somebody up. We're just going to open the console. Now, of course, this is not going to work. We're using localhost at the moment. So I'm just going to put in here Hugo boss.com. Doesn't really matter what I put. Any old password will do. Let's just check the console, and here we are. We've been collecting that state as this is a controlled form. If I hit submit, we're going to get an error. And that's fine. It's just telling us basically that this course policy. So we're not on the same domain. We've got the WordPress site, which is live on the internet, and this React, which is running locally. So that's not going to work unless we do something about that cause, which we're not going to do. Let's just flip over to the login page. I'm just going to clear that. And hopefully, again, I'll just put in, for example, my name. And yeah, we can see that that's all working. Actually, let's just hit go. We should get an error. So yeah, that 400 error. Data message, wrong user credentials. It's not really actually wrong user credentials. I think that is also actually a cause error, but we'll check for sure when we get everything uploaded onto the site and see if it works. So how do we go about actually getting our React app onto the hosting? There's a couple of things to do. Back in VS Code, if we pop over to package JSON, we need to add this line here, homepage, and then this is just the URL of the folder in your web space where the site is going to live. So you just need to add that setting. Obviously, it can be wherever you want on your domain. The next thing we need to think about is running. So if I just do Control-C to stop the local host, we need to just create a build version. So to do that, we want Npm Run Build. What that's going to do, and it will take a bit of time, it's going to give us, if we then go to wherever on your machine you're keeping this React folder, if you go there, you'll see there is this folder called build, and inside build we've got all of this stuff. We want to grab it all and then head over to your FTP client and just whatever. I mean, I called mine, as I say, in the package JSON, is just in this test site folder. So in test site, I'm just going to cut and paste everything in there. And you know, that's just the way I'm getting stuff through FTP at the moment. There are millions of clients, but basically that needs to go in the same folder. Now, the other thing to think about is the PHP script. If we head over to sign up API, the PHP script, we have told it to look already for this file called reg.php. I've actually put that in this folder called student. As long as it knows where to look for it, it doesn't really matter. So likewise, over on your hosting, you can go into student, and somewhere down here there should be, I've already uploaded it, have I? Yeah, there we are, reg.php. So that's all you need to do, and then we can see if it's working. Okay, so I've just uploaded all of that by FTP, and now I go to the URL. Let's click refresh and see what we get. Okay, we're getting some errors. Interestingly, so here we've got success is false. Let's just see what's in that object. It says message expired token. Okay, so I've tried logging in on this side before, and obviously my token has expired, which is fine. Bigger problem we've got though is there's no server message telling us that, and it says down here, uncaught in promise type error, e.serverMessage is not a function. So profile page JS31, let's just check what that is. So I've put in the profile page props.serverMessage, and it should be, I think, let's just go back to app, where I think that state is server message set server message, not, of course, not just server message. Right, let's deal with that one. The other thing I just want to point out quickly, because I didn't mention it before, was in the sign up API, we weren't actually returning anything. So I just added this quick return null because I did get an error on that. You don't have to return something from a component, but if you're not going to return anything, you need to just put return null, or you can return a fragment as well. I don't know if that's really the done thing. Right, was there one more error to deal with here? So that get didn't work. Got a 400. I think that's just because the token has expired, but we're going to double check that in a second. Okay, so if we now make sure everything is saved, and again we can do npm run build, and let's see if it works. And the pain of this is that it does take a little bit of time to do the build and then to get it uploaded. So obviously it is much quicker to develop locally. I just wanted to put this on a live site just for the fun, really. But yeah, you will save yourself a lot of time and a lot of toing and throwing if you can just develop it all locally and then go for it on the upload when you're sure it is ready. Okay, so it's done. Let's just grab all of those files, take them over to the FTP client. There we are. Right, let's refresh this one, see what happens. Oh, we've still got that error. As I say, I'm pretty sure that's just because the persist has failed. It is telling us the expired token. As I said before, that doesn't mean a great deal to a lot of web users. So obviously you're going to be wanting to do something with that error message that makes a little bit more sense. So let's see. Let's just clear out all of that. Let's see if we can sign somebody up. Okay, so sign up page. Should we call this person? Let's just call them AAA because I just want it to be at the top of the list. Let's give them a proper name. Alex111 will do. Email address is going to be alex111 at I don't know, facebook.com, and their password 123456. So the control form is working fine. We expected that. Let's submit that and see what we get. Oh, we do get a message. Again, we've got the server message, so that's obviously something I've messed up. Let's say never to that. But look, this has worked because we've still got that expired token message. So that's because I obviously haven't corrected that error properly. I thought I had. But look, we are getting Alex111's user profile. We're getting the email address from WordPress and their date of registration from WordPress. So that is working. If I just flip over to Chrome, so here's my list of users. Let's just refresh this page, and there we are. Alex111 has been created as a user. Perfect. There's his email address. Everything we need to know. I guess if we edit, we should probably see. Oh, we don't see the date of registration there. Never mind. But yeah, so that anyway, that user has been successfully created. The other thing that we can do now is pop over to just the basic URL of this site. So we're now looking at WordPress. If I refresh this page, nothing happens there. So at this moment, Alex111 is not actually logged into WordPress. So that's something that we just need to think about quickly. Okay, so the error message that we were getting was just that I had corrected this here, but I hadn't corrected it here. So I'd left it as just server message instead of set server message, which is the function we need to use. So I've already done Npm Run Build and I have uploaded that already. The other problem we had, which is that we couldn't log a user into WordPress, I think was just a glitch in the browser. I think that does work. So we're going to try that again. So I'm going to come in here. So we did Alex111 before. Let's do Alex222 this time. So interestingly, what happens if we come in here and we don't put a proper email address? I'm just going to put password 11111. If I click submit, we should get a failure. Success false. The data is invalid email address. Now, of course, we could put something front side as a prompt to the user as well. That would be a good thing to do, but let's just make that into a proper email address or something which looks like a proper email address and hit submit. And okay, so it's worked. We've got the user profile. We get his data back from WordPress. I'm going to close that one down. Now let's go over here to my site and do a refresh. And there we are. So we've actually created the user and logged him into WordPress. So that's basically been a success. I think all of the messages we've got are encouraging. What's it saying down here? So we've got the JWT, that's now in local storage. It's telling us the user is persisted. So that means that if we come back to this profile page and we just do a refresh here, we shouldn't have any problem in persisting the user. So as the user is persisted and we get the same profile. That's perfect.